So this is part 2 of my video, and I am going to go to the next slide on parentheses. So, parentheses that authors use, the two examples below are excerpts from Perlstein's article. He uses parentheses at times in his piece too. One thing he says is, to spend $80,000 on a history degree, I need to see a way forward to a career, said Kyle Tucker of Fredericksburg, Virginia, as he stood with his son in the long line in front of the engineering school's booth. The part in parentheses is, the boy was torn between cybersecurity and accounting. He's using it so the way that Perlstein is using parentheses here is he's just kind of saying this extra piece of information under his breath. He's kind of saying it as an aside to all the other information he just provided. Like, by the way, he was kind of interested in these two areas for studying. And then in this second example, when the economy was in the early stages of recovery, the unemployment rate for recently graduated majors in humanities and liberal arts, 8.4%, wasn't all that different from the jobless rates for majors in computers and math, 8.3%, biology 7.4%, business 7%, and engineering 6.5%. And so all of these numbers are in parentheses, just like we saw with the $20 amount on the other slide. So here's some parentheses that other authors use, like Gibbs. He uses it in this following way. In my 16 years in science, from high school intern to postdoc at the National Institutes of Health, I've never encountered a person who disagrees with these statements. He also says innovations resulting from science, technology, engineering, and mathematics (STEM) fields have positively touched nearly every aspect of human life. And then he also uses parentheses around the A and B when he defines diversity. So what you can learn from this is, in the first bullet point, if you ever include just some extra information that is not as important as the main statement, okay? It's not equivalent in terms of importance. You're not going to use dashes. Dashes means you're interrupting the break in thought, and that thought that's being broken in a little bit, like, that's just as important as the rest of the sentence, is what you're trying to communicate to your reader. But here, Gibbs is communicating to us that the part in parentheses is not nearly as important as everything else around it. And that's why he's using it. He still wants us to know it, but it's just not deemed as important or significant. And then in the second way he uses it, he's using it to house this acronym STEM. And so if you're doing it in your paper, you're going to want to, if you're doing, you're rhetorically analyzing Gibbs' article, you're going to want to do the same thing and put STEM after you've listed what it stands for, okay? Any acronyms for the very first time you ever use it, anytime you ever use it is, or mention it, then you're going to want to do this. And then I'm going to show you an example of how to do this complicated thing that Gibbs is doing, which is defining diversity using this parenthetical approach. We notice how the A is couched in two parentheses, the open and closing parentheses, and so is B, to give us two different working definitions of diversity. I'll show you how you can better access this strategy in your writing. So here, and I did this myself, I came up with these statements myself. Perlstein's article, Meet the Parents Who Won't Let Their Children Study Literature, 2016, sheds light on the, and like maybe I didn't finish that thought, but the important thing is that you're focusing on the year of the article, and I just put that in parentheses. Of course, I didn't have to put in parentheses. I could have put Perlstein's 2016 article, and then I could have given the title. I wouldn't have needed parentheses in that instance, but here, the way I've got it set up, the sentence can keep going without what's in parentheses and still make sense. In the second example, I do use this list, just like the diversity statement you just saw on the other slide with the A and the B. The author does well in two areas. One, citing his own personal testimony to elicit concern from us, and two, exploring causes and effects within the framework of credible data. So if you're trying to list two things, or even more than two things in your writing, but you don't want to do a bullet point because you're writing it like in an essay style, then this is the way to kind of handle it. Just make sure you use a colon, because this is an explanatory statement and you're leading into the two talking points. Gibbs defines diversity Many readers might not already be familiar with this in order to make a more meaningful point about the inequities within the STEM fields. Now, I use parentheses here because I didn't think this was as important as the rest of the sentence, but someone might argue that they do want to make an emphatic point here and they could have turned the parentheses into dashes. So sometimes it's hard to kind of make the right decision. It just depends on how much you want to emphasize the thing that you're, breaking or interrupting into. Rules of brackets. So with brackets, they're used within a quotation to set off editorial additions or corrections made by the person who is quoting. So an example would be, it, the Yalta Agreement, contained many mistakes. And so what's happening here is that the original quote verbatim is, it contained many mistakes. But if you're trying to contextualize this better for your unfamiliar reader, well, we don't know what it means, and so the person who's choosing to quote this statement needs to clarify this for us. That way we're clued in. What does it mean? Oh, it's referring to the Yalta Agreement. And we now know, we are told basically by these parentheses or by these brackets that the Yalta Agreement is just an explanation that the student writer is providing, not the original author of the statement. So it's important to not, to differentiate the credit you're giving. So here's an example of actually how Pearlstein uses brackets in this way. A study for the Association of American Colleges and Universities found that 93% of employers agree that a demonstrated capacity to think critically, communicate clearly, and solve complex problems is more important than a job candidate's undergraduate major. So he got this statement from this study, but he changed a little bit of it. There was probably a name, and he's probably not interested in giving that name, so he just said a job candidates. So he edited it himself, he used editorial brackets properly, and that's how you can do the same too if you're trying to change anything, names or just pieces of information, you want to use that. Rules with apostrophes. So the apostrophe is used with nouns and indefinite pronouns to show possession, to show the omission of letters and figures and contractions, and to form the plurals of letters, figures, and words referred to as words. So man's coat, you need an apostrophe there. Dog's leash, the leash belongs to the dog, just like the coat belongs to the man. And then its is really just a contraction for it is. That's very different from its without the apostrophe, because then you're giving a sense of possession there. And that means something different. For more examples from the articles, so these are some phrases or words that are actually brought up in or that I've come up with or found in the article. So Georgetown University Center came from Pearlstein's article. There's a possession right there with universities. Pearlstein's claim, if you're setting that up in your, you want to call attention to claims once in a while in your essay. Make sure you use the word claim. So you might give credit to the author and say his claim or her claim or Pearlstein's claim. Bidwell's argument, I'm making sure the apostrophe is always in the right place between the name and the S. And then Gibbs' personal testimony. His name's a little trickier because he already has an S in his name. So here you would just put an apostrophe right there after the S, and you don't need anything else. You don't have to keep saying Gibbs Jr. probably over and over, maybe just the first time. And you can just call him Gibbs after that, and we know who you're talking about. Rules of hyphens. So the hyphen is used to link two or more words together into a single compound word. And so here you're looking at words that I actually pulled from Bidwell's article. Low performing has a hyphen. 4-year, as in 4-year university, is a hyphen. Able-bodied is a term actually that is used in Gibbs' article now. And middle class to wealthy is hyphenated too in Gibbs' article. So these last two are from Gibbs' articles. The first two are from Bidwell's article, and they both use hyphens. So if you were to apply hyphens to essay number 2, the way you might do this is, this is a well-developed argument. And that's different than saying this argument is well-developed. If the descriptor has the word well in it and it comes after the noun, then you don't put the hyphen. But if you're using it as an adjective like this before the noun, then you're going to need the hyphen. Just like if you were to say well-renowned or well-known, so this is how you would set it up. You would need a hyphen first. His off-putting tone might not gain the reader's trust. So off-putting would be in with a hyphen. And then he is semi-professional in his approach. He's not fully professional, but he's semi. So the word semi, you'd want to hyphenate that. So I'm going to continue with going over one final punctuation and a set of rules. This is with semicolons, and the semicolon indicates a longer pause and stronger emphasis than the comma. It's used principally to separate main clauses within a sentence. You want to use a semicolon to separate main clauses not joined by a coordinating conjunction, and if you remember what those are, that's like the fanboys, right? For, and, nor, but, or, yet, or so. And so in this example, you might join two ideas that relate to each other. You must buy that car today, semicolon. Tomorrow will be too late. Make sure your ideas relate to each other. They have to have something to do with each other and connect in their meaning. Otherwise, it won't really work. And so here, they play off of each other. Let's look at another example. So when you want to use a semicolon with conjunctive adverbs, you want to make sure that you're joining two main clauses with that conjunctive adverb, such as words like however, otherwise, therefore, similarly, hence, on the other hand, then, consequently, accordingly, or thus. And an example could be it was very late, semicolon, therefore, comma, I remained at the hotel. So anytime you're using these words, you want to make sure you have a semicolon and then a comma surrounding it. And you'll notice that everything stands on its own and makes sense before the conjunctive adverb is used. It was very late. That makes sense to me. It has a subject. It was is the verb. And then it has a subject and verb, and it makes complete sense in the second part, which is I remained at the hotel. Like, I understand that. It's not a fragment. It's a complete idea. And so therefore joins these two statements. They do relate to each other in meaning. For these words, you want to make sure that you don't put a comma after then or thus if you're going to put it in the middle of the two main clauses, just like therefore is being used right here in this example. So then and thus do not need commas after them. I did notice that Gibbs uses thus several times in his article and he puts commas after it. So I have seen authors do it, but technically you don't need a comma after it. So authors who also use semicolons, there weren't too many. It was actually really hard to find. They tend to write just using just plain periods at the end of their sentences. And so this one came from Perlstein, and he said, the work done by lower level accountants, computer programmers, engineers, lawyers, and financial analysts is already being outsourced to India and the Philippines, semicolon. Soon it will be done by computers. And so you'll notice how this statement stands on its own and makes sense, and everything before the semicolon stands on its own and makes sense. But because they relate to each other in meaning, the semicolon is being used. I'd like to see you guys use more of the semicolon form of punctuation in your writing if you can. And lastly, if you're going to apply semicolons in your essay, think about the way Gibbs uses this is me thinking through these statements, and so I made these up. Gibbs emphasizes the need for more diversity and inclusion in these fields. Furthermore, he presents several logical explanations about why diversity is exactly what the STEM fields needs. I think it should just say need, actually. STEM fields need. Perlstein is successful in eliciting our emotions, semicolon. However, comma, he is less successful in maintaining his credibility. So make sure you're setting it up this way. It's also proper just to not use a semicolon at all. You could just put a period, capitalize the H, and then make sure you definitely still include the comma because it's considered like a transition, the way this conjunctive adverb is set up. But this is how you might get more comfortable connecting your ideas and trying to lengthen your sentence structures and diversifying your use of punctuation throughout your writing. This is the semicolon. All right, thank you for your time, and I hope this helps you with your writing this week as you finalize your final draft of essay number 2.